Welcome to 20 Minute Tabletop, a podcast about board, card and miniature games. Today I'm going to be talking about a very lovely, very compact and very beautiful card game called Sea, Salt and Paper. Firstly, I did think twice about perhaps recording this podcast, and I did wonder whether it was actually possible to talk for 20 minutes about a small box card game. And then this week I listened to a podcast by one of my favourite podcasters called Blind Boy. I don't know if you know Blind Boy, but if you've never listened to him before, then I'd definitely check him out. He's got nothing to do with board games, but in my opinion, he's an absolute genius and an amazing podcaster. But basically, I was sitting here listening to him for 57 minutes talk about a wasp on a plane. And I thought, if Blind Boy can talk about a wasp on a plane for 57 minutes, I can try at least to talk about what happened to be my game of the summer, Sea, Salt and Paper for 20. Well, I'm going to start with the fact that Sea, Salt and Paper is a game that if you play, you'll potentially feel is, well, not very good at first, not worth the hype at all. It's one of those games I think that has to grow on you. You play it once and you might think, what's the fuss about? And to be honest with you, when I picked up Sea, Salt and Paper, I picked it up out of a sense of guilt. I was with my family in Carcassonne in France. My wife and kids were rightly livid that I'd forgotten to bring Carcassonne to Carcassonne. But luckily, whilst I was walking around the old castle there, I noticed that there was a board game shop and the kids wanted me to pick up big box Carcassonne, but because I'm a cheap northerner, I saw next to it a very cheap small box card game that I'd seen a lot of people talking about on Instagram, although I knew very little about. And that game, of course, was Sea, Salt and Paper. I think it was about 10-12 euros, so I picked it up instead of Carcassonne, thinking that it might scratch the same itch of the camping games that I was very familiar with as a child. A couple of weeks ago, Kev and I were talking to Mike from Huff No More about the upcoming Kickstarter release, Sakana Stack, and what he was talking about was his need when designing that game to try to create a game that had that nostalgic feel of the card games that he played as a kid. And for me, Sea, Salt and Paper has got that in spades. You know, the games like Gin Rummy or Whist. I played a lot of Canasta, these set collection games, I suppose, that were as old as time. And of course, as a modern board game, Sea, Salt and Paper does add quite a few interesting mechanics and modern innovations that make it, in my opinion, far surpass just a simple set collection card game that we might all be familiar with and think, why do I need another one in my collection? So one of the things that made me pick it up off the shelf was the fact that I saw in the box that the game was designed by Bruno Cathala. And I'm sure if you're listening to this podcast as a board game fanatic, then you may well be familiar with the name Bruno Cathala because he's got quite a few hits under his belt. Notably, he was the designer of the Days of Wonder game Shadows over Camelot, which is a semi-co-op game themed around Arthurian legends and features people like King Arthur, Sir Percival, and it's a really good game. And as a Days of Wonder production, it was beautifully produced. It was semi-co-op, a bit pandemic-y, managing threats all over the game. It's out of print now, super expensive, was in my collection for a while, but I got rid of, but I really rated, really good game. As well as this, Cathala was involved in designing King Domino, another game, you know, using old mechanics of placing dominoes next to each other and modernising it into, I would argue, a modern classic, and a game that has obviously sprang sequels like Queen Domino, Dragomino, and several re-themes. It's a really good game, and of course links to Sea, Salt and Paper in the fact that it's taking something that is as old as time and modernising it. As well as that, he was involved in designing Cyclades, which is part of a trilogy of games, Comet and Inish. Really, really good area-controlled board game. So Bruno Cathala himself is a great designer. So to see his name on this tiny little small box card game really piqued my interest as well. And that's one of the reasons why I thought, I'm going to have to pick this up the shelf today. Okay, so that will serve as an introduction to Sea, Salt and Paper, but let's actually dig into the game and why I think it's so great. First off though, I want to talk a little bit about the player count of this game. It's a game that plays 1 to 4 players, and I must say I've had about 40-50 games of Sea, Salt and Paper, but very, very quickly I realised that it was a game that played best at 2. And in many ways, it's like the converse of the game Scout, which we talked about in our episode on small box card games. Now, Scout is a game I think benefits from having 5 or 6 players around the table, whereas Sea Salt and Paper, I'd always prefer to play as a duo. And that's why, if I'm honest, I think we've got 2 pockets in our genes. So that if you're ever going to the pub, you've got 5 or 6 people coming with you, maybe you start with Scout, and then invariably there'll be 2 people left at the end who've drank a little bit too much. And perhaps that time is where you just go, oh, I've got this in my left pocket of my jeans, and you bring out Sea Salt and Paper to play just as a pair, if that's your kind of vibe. And I do want to talk about the gameplay now of Sea Salt and Paper, because it's really simple. What happens is both players start with 0 cards in their hands, and on your turn, all you have to do is there's a deck of cards on the table, coffee table, wherever you put it. It's up to you, it's your game. And you draw 2 cards from the draw pile, and you've got to keep one and you've got to discard the other. And a bit like the game Sheriff of Nottingham, there are 2 discard piles, one on either side of the deck that you're drawing from. And that's important because what you can do instead on your turn is not take 2 cards from the draw deck, but you can choose to take 1 card, 1 face-up card from either discard pile when they're populated. And if at any point a discard pile isn't populated, you're forced, when you draw from the deck, to place and populate the empty discard pile. And that, my friends, is essentially the game. You either draw 2 cards from the deck or take 1 card from either face-up discard pile if you want. So the fun happens, I think, when you're drawing these cards, and what you're trying to do is set collection. A lot of the cards you see are only functional if you've got 2 of them, and these are called the duo cards in the game. And duo cards, when you play a pair of them, will give you a power, a one-off hit, something that you can do by playing them down, and you also achieve 1 point for playing those cards. I'll get onto the mechanisms for winning the game, because it is a game where you're trying to amass points as well as other things, but I'll talk about that a little later. So if you get a duo card in your hands, you can choose on your turn, once you've drawn and done all that jazz, to put the duo of cards down. But you might not do, you might just leave them in your hand, save them for later for some kind of super combo. But normally when you've got them, a pair of duo cards, you place them down, and then you can have an instant effect. And I'm just going to quickly go through what they are, because there aren't too many of these duo cards. So one of the pairs of duo cards you might collect are boat cards, and what they do is allow you to immediately take another turn, which can be really helpful if there was something juicy on either discard pile that you really wanted. If you get a pair of fish cards, you can add the top card from the deck to your hands. If you're an aggressive player, you might want to try to collect a shark and a swimmer combo. If you do that, you get to steal a random card from your opponent's hand and add it to yours. And finally, another pair of these duo cards is the crabs. And these are great because normally you can only draw the top card of the discard pile. But with the crabs, if you play a duo of crab cards, what you can do is you can rifle all the way through the discard pile and choose a card from within it that you want instead. So essentially there are only 4 types of duo cards in the standalone version of the game, although you can buy an expansion that you might want to collect. Now, earlier this week, I gave Kev a phone call, my co-host, and I said to him, look, I'm going to do a podcast on Sea Salt and Paper. And he said, well, yeah, crack on if you want, but there is absolutely no way on this planet that I'm interested in owning or ever playing Sea Salt and Paper. It's a game that just doesn't appeal to him at all. So I can imagine Kev listening to this bit now, and I've just sat there saying, look, you can collect a pair of crab cards and then you can take another turn, or you can collect a shark and swimmer and you can draw a card from the opponent's hand. And I can imagine him cynically, in a kind way, because he's a good friend, but cynically listening to me and thinking, yep, Tom, that's why I didn't want to do a podcast with you on Sea Salt and Paper. But I'm hoping that I'm able to take it from this simple place and talk about why this game really works, despite some of the simplicities in terms of gameplay. Now, the first thing I'd say to you is that you're not just trying to collect these duo cards. It is a set collection game in another way too. So a bit like, and I always refer to this game, a bit like Sushi Go, or in fact Captain Flip that we talked about on the Spiel des Jahres episodes, you might be trying to collect a load of similar cards. So in Sushi Go, you're going to collect a load of dumplings, and the more of these dumplings you can get, the more points you get. Or in Captain Flip, I believe they're called squabbies, and it's got a very, very similar game mechanic in Sea Salt and Paper, where you're either trying to collect shells or octopuses, I'm not sure what the plural for that is, octopi, I don't know, doubtful, or anchors. Now, there's some variety between those in terms of commonality. Shells are very common, octopuses less so, and these anchor cards far fewer in the deck. Now, one of the other things that the game is asking you to think about as well is the colours of these actual cards. So in Sea Salt and Paper, there are 9 blue cards, 9 light blue cards, 8 black cards, 8 yellow cards, 6 green, and then increasingly down where there's only 1 orange card. So why do you care about the colour of the cards? Well, other cards in the deck that you may choose to play are actually taking into consideration whether you can collect sets of colours. One of my favourite cards in the game is a mermaid card, and that has 2 functions. Number 1, what it allows you to do is irrelevant of whether it's a crab or a boat or an anchor, the colour of the card, you would score that. So if you had 5 blue cards at the end of the game with a mermaid, you'd score 5 points. One of the things I really appreciated about the way that they actually did these colour cards as well is they put really handy iconography on the cards for people that might be colourblind, or like me, playing in candlelight in a trailer tent where it's becoming very dark. And it was really helpful actually to be able to tell the difference between these colours through the iconography on them. So kudos there for the designers for some real consideration of inclusivity with the card game. But I've not talked, have I, about why this game is fun and why I love this game. Well, there's a few things going on here. Number 1, it comes from the drawing mechanic. So if you've got a deck in front of you and you draw 2 cards, what you might notice is that you've got 2 cards that you want, and this happens all the time. Perhaps you've drawn the shark that will go for that swimmer in your hand, but you've also got octopuses in your hand, and you've got another one there, and you're going to have to choose to put one down. And what you're hoping and praying is that your opponent, when they're playing a card, will leave that card open on the discard pile. So there's this kind of nonchalant bluffing of, okay, I'll put that down, but secretly inside you're thinking, please don't cover that card up because I really want it. So every time you get these 2 cards, it's reminiscent of being a child. I remember going to Toys R Us and walking up and down the aisles and thinking, I want everything here. And it makes you feel like that when you're playing the game. So often you're faced with a really difficult decision of, I want both of these, and you can't have them. So one of the things that's incredible about this game is the way that it plays in rounds. It is entirely up to the player about when the round ends. And you can, when you've amassed 7 points in your hand, a minimum of 7 points, you can simply say stop. And the player that you're playing against will count up their points and you'll count up your points. And that's it. You will get some points. But if you want to take a risk, what you can do is you can say last chance. And the opponent that you're playing against will have 1 more turn. Now, if you win that, after they've had 1 more turn, not only do you get to score the points in your hand, but you would also get to count up the number of blue cards if you had the most and add that on top. So maybe I picked up 9 points from duo cards and having lots of anchors or penguins or whatever I'm collecting. But then I can also say, well, I've got 6 blue cards, so I'm going to get 15 points in total. And your opponent only gets to score their colour bonus. So you might end up with 15, they might end up with 4. But the risk taking involved in looking at your opponent who's got a handful of cards and you don't know how strong they are, really, and saying to them, last chance, and watching them draw 2 cards from the draw deck and their face filling with a smile when they've got a card that's going to absolutely tank you in terms of the number of points. But if you say last chance and it doesn't pay off, if the opponent does have more points than you, then you yourself would only get to score your colour bonus, which would mean if you've only got 4 blue cards in your hand, that's it, you just score 4 points for that round. So it's a risk, and when it pays off, it feels amazing, and when it doesn't, it feels awful. But either way, it's great fun, and one person around the table is going to be having the time of their lives. And this game carries on like this if you're in a 2-player game until one of you has amassed 40 points and manages to win. I mentioned mermaids before, and if at any point you end up with the 4 mermaids that are in the deck in your hands, you automatically win the game. And that only happens on a few occasions. Maybe I've seen it happen 2-3 times in the 30-40 games that I've played. But when it does happen, I've never seen so much joy on a person's face. It is absolutely brilliant. Now, fundamentally, this is an abstract set collection game, so therefore it could have been themed in any way that the designers wanted. But what they've done is they've made it all themed around sea, as you can probably guess from all the references I've made to crabs and boats. And the artwork is all origami versions of those things. Really, really lovely origami, octopuses and penguins. And that gives the game a real charm and wonderful aesthetic. It's one of the things I was talking to Mike from Huff No More about in a previous episode, is the fact that when that game launches on Kickstarter, I really think the art itself will pull it through just because it was so beautiful. And Sea Salt and Paper is a game, again, that has such a lovely look to it. There are criticisms of the card stock I've seen online, but certainly my version of the game, which has been well thumbed and well played, has held up quite nicely. I wouldn't be tempted to sleeve the game because one of the nicest things about it is the compact box it comes with, and therefore you would lose that portability. And of course you could throw it in a deck box if you wanted to really sleeve the cards, but I do like the fact it's so small and guilt-free in terms of shelf space. So there it is, Sea Salt and Paper. I just think at about £10 you can't go wrong with this game. It's one of those old-fashioned games that is a wonderful pastime, a game that just makes you sit as you're playing it feeling a sense of excitement, maybe the nervousness of having discarded that wonderful card that you want to pick up on the next round, or maybe that fact that you've got a shark and a swimmer and the person is literally squirming as you reach out to pick a random card from their hands because you may well take that one card that they're trying to collect their set around that is so integral to them getting points. And I absolutely adore the mechanic where you can say, I'm stopping now, and the groans from across the table because the person isn't quite there with what they were trying to do. And the risk-taking element of last chance, I'm going to score all my points and my colour bonus. And when that goes wrong, it feels horrific, but it's so quick to play and so accessible. A game that you can play with the entire family. And I'm singing its praises rightfully because I do think it is an excellent, excellent game. And if it ever does get to the point where you're starting to feel that the game's getting a little bit tired, the replayability is dropping somewhat, then for just about £4, not sure how much that would cost if converted into dollars, but for very little money you can pick up the Sea Salt and Paper expansion, which is called Extra Salt. And in that, I mean, it's relatively expensive for the amount of cards you get. I think it's about 8. But even with that said, the amount of variability and more interest in the game, you get cards like a jellyfish, a lobster, and you get some other cards like a seahorse. I'm not going to go through what these things do, but they just pad out that deck with a few more options, a few more decisions as you're drawing these 2 cards from the draw pile and making you think, what is the optimal thing to do here? I don't really like to ever say, go and buy a game, because you're all unique humans and you've all got your own tastes. But in terms of a filler game, I remember going back on the ferry from France, and it was really nice for me to walk around, and I saw one nice family playing Love Letter, and I saw another nice family in another part of the ferry playing Coup, and I was playing a lot of Sea Salt and Paper. And I think this is a game that if you're travelling or want to pass the time with in a really relaxed way, then yeah, Sea Salt and Paper is something that you might want to look at. Now, finally, as I reach the end of the podcast, the usual please go out to you all. If you've never written a review of the show, then please do on iTunes. I think there's 4 or 5 5-star reviews from people we don't know, which is really, really kind of them. But if you do regularly listen and would just write a couple of things down, that would be great. The only reason we want that is not to stroke our egos, but it is in order to become more visible so that maybe a few more people might check out the podcast. If you want to as well, please join our Discord where we have regular chats about games. Lovely community there, about 30 people. So it's very small but very welcoming. So please do join the Discord. And finally, if you really, really want to support the podcast, we do have a Patreon. Loads of bonuses there. The link is in the show description. At the lowest level, you can support the podcast for just a few pounds a month, which will go towards our fees in making sure that we do this every week. And also, more than that, show us that you appreciate the work we are doing. But also, you might want to back at a slightly higher level. There's a lot of foldscape scenery that Kev has been working on, which is incredible, really. So worth for checking out. And also the solo miniatures game, Decline. And with those usual pleas aside, the most important thing I want to say is thank you for turning up. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing the podcast. And thank you for being awesome and supporting a small independent board game podcast. Enjoy your gaming, people. Check out Sea Salt and Paper.